Welcome to Savvy Business, Life Unscripted, with your host, Christina Rivera, where our guests share their wisdom and valuable business tips, empowering our audience to expand their personal potential.
Hi, Stephen Kowalski. Welcome to Savvy Broadcasting, Life Unscripted. I'm so grateful to have you here today. How are you?
Great. Good to be here with you.
Oh my gosh, you betcha. Today we're going to talk about bringing conscious creativity to businesses with organizational development expert, you, Stephen Kowalski. Often, I think creativity is not even put on the forefront of when people think to create a business. They've got these great ideas, but how do you bring that creative consciousness to your business on a daily basis to help bring this vision that you all can create with the people you hire and your talent and everyone coming together to create a fabulous business. Before we go to answer all of those, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your backstory and what even brought you to creating your book.
Sure. I've been working in the arena of leadership development, executive development, organization development for many, many years, and always with a passion around creativity and innovation. I started my life as an artist. I thought maybe I would be an artist, but I realized I was more interested in the psychology of creativity, why we create, what are the conditions that give rise to creativity. And so I've kind of been a student of creativity all my life, did my doctorate degree and my doctoral thesis on the topic of organizational creativity. Mm-hmm. And I've been watching both myself and others for many, many years, working with IT professionals, scientists, engineers, HR folks, pretty much everyone from all different domains, and watching how they express their creativity and working with them to help us express our creativity together more effectively. So I felt like now is the time to put everything that I had learned into the book Creative Together and share it with the world.
Now, I'm wondering your perspective. Do you think most people are just naturally creative, but maybe don't even realize they're being creative in their workplace?
Absolutely. Well, this is the big shift that I talk about in Creative Together, the shift from the old story of what creativity is, which most of us think of it as an ability. And because we think of it as an ability, we think, well, we have some measure of it, and we're either less creative than most people or more creative maybe, or right in the middle with just about everybody else, or not as much as our kids or Steve Jobs or somebody. We're always comparing. And the old story says creativity is an ability. The new story, what I talk about in the book, is that creativity is actually a potential. We've misunderstood it. So our creativity is there as a potential, just waiting for the right circumstances to show up and help us out. And if the circumstances don't call for my creativity, it doesn't show up. So when folks are kind of in a little bit of the doldrums or in a routine, or they're living, the same day over and over again, like Groundhog Day, that movie Groundhog Day, right? You might not realize, wow, my creativity is there. It's just waiting for either me to activate it or for the world around me to activate it. I mean, think of how much creativity showed up when we hit the pandemic and we all had to completely shift the way that we were working together and living together. So it's there when we need it. And we can need it because of what's happening to us from the outside world, or we can need it because we have our own aims and desires and goals and wishes and what we want to create in the world.
Wow. This is fascinating. I recall early on when I started in the corporate arena, I would come into a place and I had a unique perspective of being able to see the whole picture from above and saying all the bits, what's working and what's not working. It was kind of like seeing the cogs in a machine. And I'd be like, this is missing here, or that's missing there. It was something that I was really, really good at. And I would come into one of my first, I think it was a copy shop of some sort. And I would immediately, here's where the stoppage is. Here's why you're not doing as well as you could. And I remember them saying, that's nice. Go back to your desk. Because, I'm a new person. I'm like 18, 19 years old. They're like, that's nice. Go back to work. And it's interesting you say that, because I think a lot of times creativity gets snuffed out of us based on the working environment, where it's like, you come here, you be a cog, you go home. And I think companies are really missing a lot of potential with a lot of the workers they have by not drilling into that creativity.
Absolutely. I mean, there's all kinds of organizational sludge, as I call it in Creative Together, the resistance, the protecting, the credit seeking, all the trappings of bureaucracy, all of these things that actually get in our way if we let them. And so there's a lot of juicy material there to help people kind of navigate what it means to create inside of a social system. And then, of course, there are people who are, out there entrepreneuring and building their own businesses. And there's lots to learn there too, because our vision, the purpose for what we're doing and what we want to deliver in the world is so much more powerful when it's shared. And when it's built together. And with that shared purpose, then we start to activate people's creativity. Purpose, it turns out, is one of the most important elements in the conditions that give rise to creativity.
And it's interesting, Stephen. I remember many years ago, I started specifically this show as a marketing tool in tangent with my financial consulting. I said, that's my jam. This just kind of puts my word out there. People get to know me doing this thing, build my credibility, all that jazz. It snowballed into a whole new animal on its own. But why I'm mentioning it is that about 6 months in, I started doing some meetup events where I would kind of do some financial teaching and getting people to know whatever. So anyway, someone once said to me, because they had heard my podcast, they said, you know what? When I walked in and asked the event center to set up our space, I said, could you set it up where we're going to have like 50 people come and I'm going to lecture? And they said, oh, okay. So what they did, they set up 2 chairs in the front with a little table and some flowers on it and 2 coffee cups, kind of arranged like, we're going to have a interview style with an audience. And at that time, my show was very new. I was just doing an online audio podcast. And I looked at that and I thought, well, that's weird. I didn't ask for that. I asked, for a PowerPoint and to set it up like I'm going to lecture. And then my husband walked in and said, that's a good idea. You should do that. You should do the interviews in front of people and make this another thing you do. I'm like, oh, that's silly. Well, a couple of years go down and I started getting feedback that people would like to see more live events, but kind of what idea came to me is that we do a kind of networking event where people can network, but in the front, we'll have one subject that gets to be interviewed on a subject that we're all going to talk about, relate on, help each other with. And that will be the theme of the night. And then we use that format with the 2 chairs and and people seem to love it. But see, it was that moment of clarity and creativity that came from my husband. And of course, maybe the people of the event center that put that in his head when they set up the room, not the way I asked, but in a different manner.
What I love about your story is that there was serendipity there. Something emerged that wasn't exactly how you had thought it was going to be, and you ran with it. And our creativity loves those kinds of situations. And if we're paying attention with intention, we can capture those opportunities and actually turn them into ways to create new value, like you did.
Wow. So now let's say someone listening in, it doesn't own a business, but works for a business. And they feel really, like you said, the hamster on the wheel or the Groundhog Day over and over. How do they begin to get in touch with their creativity, bring it out, or make it a part of their everyday life? Some companies aren't too keen on allowing their worker bees to be that creative, but how do they get in touch with their creativity and bring it to their daily life?
Sure. I think it's such a great question. And I think it starts with ideas. If I've got what I call creativity disruption disorder, or CDD, I talk about it in Creative Together. If I've got CDD, I'm kind of shut down. My creativity is out in the lobby waiting for the show to end. And, I'm not in touch with it. But actually, we have ideas all the time, ways to improve things we see waste that could be eliminated. A new invention, a new process, or a tweak to a process. We have ideas all the time. So I would say maybe the first thing is to get back in touch with that idea generating machine that happens in our heads, always coming up with these ideas. All right. So then the question is, how do you implement those ideas, or how do you bring them up in a social system that may not be receptive? I think a lot of that is about joining with others. And sometimes we think we have to go it alone, or if I have the idea, I'm the one who has to build it out and implement it. But actually, if I join with others, if I share my ideas, if I talk with stakeholders, if I understand what they value, the stakeholders or people who might make investment decisions in whether or not my idea is going to go forward, if I join with them, if we stand together, then I think there's strength in bringing that idea forward. I also need to be good at understanding how to create a business case for that idea and describe it in terms that make sense to the managers and leaders who are going to help make investment decisions about whether or not the idea goes forward.
So what I'm gathering from you is like when my 18-year-old self, wow, here's some ideas. They're like, okay, that's nice. Go back. I wasn't really putting a case together to show them how this benefits them, because my husband always says people want to know what's in it for me. And so if you can't present the case that shows them this is what's in it for you, all of us together, it just sounds like someone with a whole bunch of great ideas, but just going to make a mess of things. I think the other thing that people are scared about, whether on one side or the other, one side being you have the idea, but I don't want to be trapped into now I have to do a lot of extra work because now I'm going to be stuck with the leadership of this. I'm like, no, I just have the idea. Don't make me do that. Or on the other hand, you're so excited, like I was at my 18-year-old self, that you're like gung ho, but you haven't really shown how you can do this with others. It's all about, it kind of comes across as it's all about you.
Right. And when we do go to build that case, one of the most important things to keep in mind is to frame the case in terms of the benefit of the people who are going to be users or beneficiaries of what it is that the idea will bring. So instead of saying like, oh, the business case is about executing this idea, or when we built the portal, or when we've designed let's design the new process. No, that's not compelling. The compelling part is what's it going to make possible for people, for customers, for markets, for the organization? What's it going to make possible for the people who are going to be using the products and services that come from the idea? That's when it starts to get compelling, because people can really catch that vision of breakthrough and understand what'll be different in the world when your idea is implemented.
And get behind it. Because I think one of the things that scares people, and they say people are scared of change, I think they're scared of it's going to be chaos. I'm going to get a bunch of extra work in my queue. Do I really want that? Instead, if you're presenting a case like a new process, you're like, okay, this is going to be a little difficult getting started, but here's the vision of what your day is going to look like when it's up and going. You're going to have a much easier day at it, of flowing and not struggling as much to do your daily tasks or whatever it might be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Framing it in that way, it makes all the difference. And then, there's still maybe resistance. And I think it's important to think about resistance by talking creative together about different kinds of resistance. There's resistance that's really healthy. It's the resistance that's about the quality of the idea, or the logic in the idea, or whether or not it's feasible and viable, and whether people might want it, right? There's that kind of resistance. So someone might say, well, I'm not with you. I'm not behind you. And it might be really great. Like, what about, how can I use that kind of resistance to make my idea better? But then there's other kinds of resistance that are not healthy, like political jockeying. When a company invests in my idea, they may actually have to say no to someone else's, or it might change. My idea might actually change something that was somebody else's baby, and was the reason they got a lot of kudos, right? And so these different kinds of resistance, we have to be prepared for them, and we have to understand how to navigate these different kinds of resistance that are part of that organizational sludge sometimes.
I love that we went here, because I've been in situations where many years ago, I had started in a company. I loved it. I had felt that it was going to be my pinnacle to move up all the way to the ranks of VP. That was my goal at the time. And new management came in, saw me as a person who was very creative, and said, give us your view of what you think this department could look like and how it could run better. And I stupidly just presented this huge report, hundreds of pages, graphs, everything. I was so happy. And I promptly got fired, because this was a new manager. My direct manager right beneath this new person did not like that report and felt it endangered her job. And so she made a case to get rid of me. And I thought, wow, if only I'd been smart enough to include her. That would have
Yes.
made all the difference because yeah, it was cool. He wanted my feedback, but maybe I go into her office and go, hey, so and so who just started here asked for my feedback and I had some ideas, but I want to run them by with you. You want to work with me on this? I think that would have made, that political thing you're talking about would have changed the whole vision of it because this way she wouldn't have felt threatened.
Absolutely. Well, you're hitting on the reason the book is titled Creative Together,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so much more powerful when we do it together. But there's lots of stuff that gets in the way of doing it together. And so, I talk about our creative style, the habits of how we create and how they formed in relationship to social systems,
Wow.
how they can get in the way. Talk about how we could share leadership and co-create more effectively. So, it's not, I could change the story of who I am as a creator and realize, wow, I've got this incredible potential,
Mm-hmm.
and understand that now there's a whole new world open to me, but maybe I'm still not sure about how do I do that effectively with others. So the first part of the book is about changing the story of what I believe about creativity and how I create.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part is about taking that out in the world and learning to create together more effectively in exactly the kind of situation that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Years later, when I look back at it, I was a little upset about how things turned out and felt like, wow, they don't value me and da da da. And then people, if they have experience like I had at that time, they could go about going, I'm just going to cover this creativity and not share it because it just gets dumped on and it doesn't get recognized and la la la. Instead, I did some, reflecting and realized, well, I was part of the problem in that I didn't work to bring people into the fold to say, how can we do this together? I would just so tickle pink that he liked my ideas. And I thought this could be my way to move on up to the pinnacle VP ladder. And sometimes all of those things that you mentioned early on get in the way of us really connecting and creating together. Cause we have all these, everyone has their own story in their head.
Yes. What I love about what you're saying is you're kind of describing what I mean when I say conscious creativity. You were actually in that moment having self-awareness that helped you use that situation to your advantage, in your life. And that's what conscious creativity is all about, bringing more self-awareness, more intention, more attention to the process of creating and what we learn along the way about ourselves and others.
Yeah, this is fascinating because I think often in the corporate world, things can become very convoluted and confusing. And I in the past old days, I would sit there after work. We go for cocktails on a Friday and complain, blah, 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 blah. They don't understand us and they don't reward us or blah, blah, blah. But what I like what you're talking about is when you can sit back, kind of peel back the layers and say, what part do I play in the whole chess game of life, because you're inside your head seeing it from your perspective, but there's so many intertwining perspectives on a day-to-day basis that you're not even considering.
Absolutely. And one of the tips I tell folks that I work with is suss out the constraints as early as possible in the journey. For example, I did about 15 years in HR, and one of the things I would always do is go to the legal department first, because I wanted to know what were the employment laws, what were the regulations, what were the constraints that I was going to have if I was designing a working flexibly program or building an employee career center or whatever it was that I was doing. And I would go to the legal department first. And my colleagues would say, why do you go to the legal department? They're always telling you what you can't do. And I was like, yes, I want to know what I can't do as early as possible so I can work around it. And so when you talk about having drinks after on a Friday or something and complaining, oftentimes I would hear my colleagues complaining about people who were stopping them because of certain constraints that they didn't suss out, they didn't actually seek out. And so one of my pieces of advice for folks listening is try to find out what those constraints are, because once I know what they are, I can actually work to advocate it through activism or to really understand this constraint. Is it really non-negotiable, like many people sometimes present them, or can I negotiate this or work around it? How can I bring my creativity to that obstacle or that constraint as part of my process?
Wow. And what's fascinating about this is people will often get to the first block and be like, it's it. There's a stoppage. They're not letting us do this.
Yes.
But what you're saying is what I really, really like is that once you find out what the boundaries are, you're like, let's get creative and see how we can put this out into the world. And maybe not the first vision I had because there's these boundaries, but work within the boundaries, but still create, whatever it is we're trying to create.
Absolutely. Create and adjust is kind of the name of the game, especially in big social systems where there's lots of people who will be interested in the idea and want to have a part in it, or tell you, where the boundaries are. So create and adjust is really important. It's kind of a bedrock of agile and agility now. A lot of people are doing agile, which is a lot about iteration and early early input. And, there's those principles are really important in bringing new ideas to fruition.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this is that often when you have that first vision and then you have the boundaries, you don't realize now you have to put on your creative hat and come up with a new solution, but it could be even better than your initial idea because you had to actually, as you say, suss out the boundaries and now come to even greater idea that works within the boundaries that sometimes are there for a reason.
Absolutely. I love what you're saying because it gets at some of the criteria I really like to think about, which is like desirability. Will people want this? What benefit is it going to have in their lives? And feasibility, is it technically possible? And viability, how will it play out in the ecosystem? And will people receive it? Will they adopt it? Is the ecosystem set up? I'm thinking about a solution that I heard someone talking about that was going to require that 400,000 general practitioners change the way they led their practice. And just like, that's not going to be viable. You're not going to get 400,000 general practitioner doctors to change the way they run their practice to make your idea work, right? So desirability, feasibility, and viability are really great as sort of touchstones to think about, whether an idea is gonna fly.
And perhaps that person had the idea for the 400,000 practitioners that is fabulous for the medical industry, but cannot be done like that. You might have to lay it out bit by bit. We start with this phase and then the next phase and the next phase till we build out the greater picture that helps many, because something huge you generally can't just pop out of the box quickly and easily.
IDEO is famous for bringing us the concept of prototyping. And prototyping, we're talking about that. How could we prototype this idea maybe with a small subset and start to build the case and show value, show benefit, show the return on investment?
Yeah. And now you mentioned something just when we got started here, how the world has changed and people had to creatively think differently, businesses, with COVID and the whole pandemic. Because interestingly, before it happened, many businesses kind of had the idea that there's no way we could possibly function with a complete remote workforce. And not all businesses could do that, but a good many that were office related type businesses could, especially at this time frame when we have, tools like Zoom and personal computers in almost every house. It allowed for that functionality and that perspective of working remote to happen. And now I see online a lot of businesses are continuing that, where, okay, your employee staff or whatever is working around the world. One business I talked to, some employees are in Cyprus and beaches and, Thailand. But of course, the bottom line being you have to present the results. But that wouldn't have even been possible before 2 years ago. Or thought about.
It's amazing. It's so amazing what is possible when we're confronted with such a disruption like COVID and the pandemic, and how we had to rise to that occasion. One thing I will say is we've done a lot of rebounding and we've done a lot of adapting. And for me, there's kind of 4 arenas of where we might apply our creativity. And rebounding and adapting are 2 really important arenas. We've seen so much creativity there, but they're a little bit more on the reactive side. If you think about inventing and you think about positively disrupting, like disruptive innovation, those are more on the proactive side. And so what I'm encouraging people to do as we, round the corner on 3 years and start to look forward is to acknowledge the incredible power of our creativity to rebound and adapt, and also start to turn a little bit more towards inventing and disrupting and thinking about, okay, how can we start to fold in some of these ideas as well as, just adapting and rebounding.
I love that idea, because the point is, a lot of these changes came about because of necessity. It was, you had no choice. Boom. You better rebound. You better make this happen, or you're going out of business. And that's not the position you want to be in. I recall there was one industry of a client we've had on, or a guest we had on many years ago, who said her industry was all about not proactive, reactive, meaning when something bad goes wrong, now we look to fix it. And she was an expert in her field that said, I want to go about this from, let's see the problem ahead of time, the possible problems. Let's work on a solution before they get here, so we're not having to just jump up and kill ourselves trying to fix a problem once it's happened.
Absolutely. There's a great resource for that for your readers. I talk about it in Creative Together, but also chapter 4 in Gary Hamel's book, Leading the Revolution. It's titled Be Your Own Seer. And he really helps us understand what are some critical questions we could be asking to see around the corner. In Creative Together, I talk about one of our superpowers, one of 4 superpowers, is seeing beyond. And I've incorporated some of his work. But if people want to go to the source, chapter 4 in Gary Hamel's book, Leading the Revolution, is a great chapter, very inspiring.
Well, I say both of your books are super inspiring. And where can people find out more about you, get their very own copy of Creative Together? How can they do that?
Sure. Obviously, anyone's favorite online retailer would be a great place to go to order the book. Also, links to online retailers are on my site, stephenkowalski.com. There's also great resources. In the book, I've got QR codes that link to extra resources that are on stephenkowalski.com. You don't have to have the book to see those resources, but they do make a little bit more sense in context when you do. But the site is full of information about the book, as well as about my consulting practice, Creative License Consulting. Creative License is another one of our superpowers that I talk about. So that's where people can find me. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn as well and reach out.
Awesome. Well, it's so important, because I find that this is not only important for businesses, but our everyday life. People get entrapped in kind of the same old Groundhog Day. And we want people to live their fullest, grandest potential, and they can do that. And your book can help. Everyone, go out and get a copy of Creative Together, Sparking Innovation in the New World of Work today. And thank you, Stephen Kowalski, for coming to Savvy Broadcasting.
Thank you so much, Christina. Great to talk with you. Take care.
You betcha.
Like, subscribe, and share this episode. To listen to more savvy episodes and savvy biz tips, go to www.lifeunscriptedradio.com. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest, email Christina at lifeunscriptedradio.com.